Hey, deserving listeners, couples therapy on Showtime. Let's watch.
I feel like she's always wanting to believe in me, but the things I say sound just a little bit too much. I don't know that I would accept someone else saying even what I say. I accept it because I'm saying it. And my expectation is that she needs to accept it because I'm saying it.
Interesting disclosure there from him. He's saying, I don't know if I would accept me if I were her. I accept what I'm saying because I'm saying it, but I don't know if I would accept what I'm saying if I were her. So this is a transitional space that he is in right now. He comes from a place of self-centeredness, which I'm quite positive is due to the tremendous amount of neglect and abuse that he went through. I think it was primarily emotional neglect and just general neglect that he went through, and chaos, but also I think a little bit of abuse. And he is still undifferentiated. He's still in that black and white space of that of a child. He's still in that self-centeredness, that narcissistic place that you are in when you're a child. Again, I can't diagnose him, but what we're being presented, it looks that way to me, but I couldn't know unless I talked to him personally. But then what we would like him to be in a place, I think, is for him to be able to have empathy, to truly be in other people's shoes in a healthy adult, securely attached adult, differentiated way. In the ability to say, okay, yeah, I shouldn't say that, or I shouldn't do that, or I bet you, now that she's reacting that way, I bet you I did do something wrong. We all struggle with this, particularly when we're in the middle of a fight, but when we're calm, and maybe a little bit of us when we're in a fight, we're able to retain that ability to have empathy, to be in other people's shoes, to have compassion, and to see people accurately, to mentalize, to be in their mind, or take a good guess as to what's going on in their mind accurately. So that's where we would want him to be. We know where he's coming from, but he's in a transition point right now, which is this contemplative place of, I think if I were her, I wouldn't like me very much. And he says it still in that way that he presents himself, which is seemingly very self-assured. But I think this is actually him taking baby steps. He's taking a leap right now. It's like a toddler taking their first steps. And let's continue watching.
And any trespass on that, I view as like a betrayal.
You said it's very, when you feel challenged, you feel like that's when you react. I don't know. In my mind, it sounds like in one way, Mao, you're describing how you...
Okay, so he's just standing up in the middle of her talking. So I don't know. But my first thought, if I were the therapist, would be, we extended ourselves too far into vulnerability for him. If one hypothesis about Mao's relational traumas is that it has caused him to be so guarded about his vulnerability, because when he was vulnerable, he was extremely let down as a child. And there can be tremendous anxiety. We all get anxious when we get vulnerable, right? It feels like we're walking down the street naked. It's a feeling we all have. But for those people who have been abused or neglected growing up significantly and haven't healed from it yet, it can be very, very distressing. Essentially, it's like you're about to, jump off of a bridge. It's that kind of fear. Your body has the same response. And so that would be my suspicion, is that he's been too vulnerable, because the vulnerability that I think he is worried about is if he admits that Annie is right, that his wife is right, then that means that Annie has license to leave him. That's often what we're terrified of, which doesn't really make any logical sense. It's usually the opposite, right? To deny Annie's experience causes Annie to want to leave. But we have this weird bias, all of us do, that if we admit that we are wrong and we're in a very vulnerable, the more vulnerable we are, the more wrong we are, honestly, the harder it is to admit that we're wrong. The less self-confidence we have, the harder it is to admit that we don't have self-confidence. It's this catch-22. And so I wonder if by admitting, Annie might actually have reason to be upset with me, she might now leave me, what do I do? I'm panicking. And then he's standing up and walking around the room. Now, it's pretty rare that a client will do this. especially in the offices that I have, because her office, there's actually some space you could, my couch, there's just a wall behind it. And there's things to look at in her office that seem interesting. So maybe it lends itself to that. But it's pretty rare. But I've had clients do that before, and I am totally fine with it. I don't understand why clients don't do it more often. Sometimes I do it as a therapist, particularly when I was seeing like 9 clients back to back. Sometimes you just get tired of sitting and you just want to stand up and stretch your back, or, get relaxed, or, get the blood going again. So it's totally fine, but let's see what happens here.
Live, I guess, based on your background, your history, the history that you've described.
What are you doing?
Just walking around. Yes.
So a wife, Andy's like, what are you doing? Oh, I don't know, just walking around. And then he starts fiddling with something. Now, if he wanted to stretch his legs, totally fine. If he's getting tired, totally fine. If his back hurts, totally fine. But if he's being distracting, this is the sort of behavior that we would expect from a child. And what I used to treat families with children, they would do this. Teenagers sometimes, but kids definitely. You got a 5-year-old, you got a 7-year-old, you got a 10-year-old. They're definitely jumping off that couch and doing all sorts. They're checking things out and looking for toys or looking for something to play with. So maybe that's what's happening. He's regressing to that place. I suspect that there's something going on with him he's quite scared and he doesn't know what to do with it.
That I can't just have it be a simple, can you just turn the car around? We're 2 blocks from home. I just realized I forgot my sunglasses, Like, no, I can't. I also can never be the driver, so that's never up to me either. If we are together, I am on his ride.
So I think I've talked about this before, but 2 things. One is his relational traumas probably make it very difficult for him to give up power, because when he did give up power, that meant very bad things for him. That's one hypothesis. The other is, of course, sexism, which is that men are taught, and women to some extent too, but men particularly are taught that they need to be in power. We are, as men, taught that if we are the passenger in a car in that venue, in particular, we are a woman essentially, or we're a child. And that is one of the worst insults that you can ever give to a man, is to call them a baby or to call them a woman. And I suspect that, that's a part of it as well. But I imagine the inflexibility of it has to do with the terror of being powerless in the face of someone else.
Okay.
Because it's not just
the difficulty
that stuff.
influencing Mao.
Period.
I get it. First of all, what do you think about this way of summarizing things? What's exhausting Annie, at least, that your fixity or your rigidity is maddening to her?
All right, so we've been here before where he's being asked to react to Annie's frustration about him. What we would hope is that he would say something like, yeah, I can be a little rigid sometimes. I sometimes really kind of get in my head and frustrated, and it's hard for me to relax. And in those moments, it's just overwhelming to think about other people, getting in my way. And so I just tell them to shut up, and that's not okay with me. Sometimes, though, I think there's usually there's always a but. There's always a but hopefully he would say something like that. Now, what we've seen before from him before is that his first response is, okay, inside I think he's rejecting it. He's thinking, that's stupid. Everyone is dumb. I'm smart. And when people criticize me, they're stupid because I'm flawless, and I need to be flawless because I have no self-esteem underneath it all. And so I need to shut that down. But if I shut it down in front of the therapist, it's not going to look very good. So I should probably, do something else. Well, how about I just say something that retains my superiority, retains my rigidity, retains my rejection, but doesn't cause any further problems. And so his typical response is to say something along the lines of, yeah, I hear what she's saying. I understand that's her perspective. Let's see what he says.
I think it's maddening to her, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She has a fairly narrow perspective when it comes to that.
Narrow perspective meaning she's not taking into account other things.
Yeah.
So you're
There's nothing
saying
for-
that's-
your choices in life are this. I mean,
So I totally understand Annie. Annie comes across as pretty reasonable. She's talking about, she gave an example of, I forgot my sunglasses. We're 2 blocks away. Can we turn around? And he says no. I mean, that would be pretty upsetting. And instead of just saying, yeah, sorry about that, he says, I understand that's how she thinks, and she's pretty weird. She doesn't understand. And again, I've said this before, I suspect my hypothesis with him is that to accept and even just allow a criticism to be in the air without shooting it down risks, one, being powerless, which I'm guessing is extremely scary for him. 2, risks what I was talking about earlier, rejection. To say, yes, I was wrong in that instance. And when you're a black and white thinker, because you haven't graduated developmentally from early childhood as a gray thinker, gray thinking, it starts to develop through grade school, right? From like 5 to 10. There's certain markers that we will be able to measure in children in terms of the ability to think gray and to think more creatively and to think more abstractly. And it's when you feel bad being criticized, it hurts, right? But when you're a gray thinker, when you're a differentiated adult, mature person, you're able to say, well, this hurts, but I understand what they're saying. And I think they're being a little unreasonable, but there's probably a grain of truth to that. That's a gray zone. When you're a black and white thinker, it's this hurts, it's wrong. 100%. There's no gray zone. It's either right or it's wrong, and she is partially wrong, and so she's all wrong, and so I reject it. And if I admit that she's right, then that risks her being given license to complain about all sorts of things, and then she's going to leave me, and I'm not going to get my attachment needs met.
Please don't make a giant summary right now, please.
No giant summaries.
Because-
She's right. That's correct, and you should feel that way.
Yikes. So he rolled his eyes. And so if I were there, I would break it down into small little pieces. I think the therapist is making a judgment call to let them talk, which is fine. But I'm real active as a couples therapist. I'm really in their face usually, unless they are able to have conversations that are not like this. When they're in this mode, I don't let this go on for very long, unless I'm observing to see the pattern. But I would say, Annie, I get it. I hear what you. So if I understand you, Annie, you're saying that there are times that you would wish he would listen to you. Is that right? Yeah, I'd wish he'd listen to me. Okay. And as an example you gave, you're driving away from the house and you forgot your sunglasses. You're 2 blocks away. And you say, hey, can we turn around? And he won't. And that upsets you. That hurts your feelings. That is inconvenient to you. Is that right? Yes, it's very, okay. So, Mao, when she says that, what do you think? And he's like, well, she's just, she's a loco and she's weird. And I'd say, okay, did that happen, that one event when you were driving away from the house? And he's like, well, I don't really remember it. And I'd say, well, is it possible that happened? And he might say, well, maybe it was more like 5 blocks, but sure, maybe something like that happened. Okay. So can you understand that regardless of your reasons, which maybe you have reasons, that would upset her, that she is asking you to do things. She's asking for a favor and you're rejecting her. Can you imagine that might hurt her feelings? And he might say, well, no, I don't. So now we're right on the issue. Because in his mind right now, he's saying, well, there's another side of the story. And it's like, yeah, okay, but this is just my style. Is I like to, when I see this kind of behavior, I like to zero in on one particular thing because usually it elucidates the barrier, elucidates the defense, because it is so on its face, so ridiculous. And often the spouse, the Annies of the world, will go, oh my God, what's wrong with him? Because the way that I laid it out, it's like, can you understand, Mao, that if she asks you for something and it's not that big of a deal to do, and you don't do it because it inconveniences you, can you imagine that would upset her? And now he would probably say something like, well, she's always forgetting something, and I just don't understand why she can't get her crap together. And it's like, okay, sounds like you have a request too as well. You get frustrated with her because she forgets things on the way to the car. She gets frustrated with you because you don't turn around. Okay, but regardless of what to do in a situation like that, maybe the best course of action is to just say, look, you snooze, you lose, or that ship has sailed. The car is out of the garage. We've established that, once that happens, unless it's a massive emergency, you have to, face the consequences because I'm not sure. Whatever. It doesn't matter what you do, but can you at least empathize? Can you understand how she feels? That's what we're trying. She doesn't, in this moment, need you to change your policies, I don't think. She'd like that. But really what she's looking for is just some empathy, some understanding. And when he refuses to empathize and say, yeah, I could see how that would be frustrating, then we are up against the defense. And that's when I really go for it. And sometimes, as long as I have a good enough relationship with someone, I will really drill someone on that. Not to put them down, but to really elucidate and illuminate the problem for the Maos of the world. Because until they realize what is going on with them, it's hard for them to change. And so I'll really so Mao, really, you can't empathize. Regardless of, there's another side of the story, which I'm sure there is, you can't be in her shoes and empathize or at least validate the frustration that she feels. Even if she's wrong in asking you to turn around, can you at least understand how she feels? And then he'd be like, no, I don't really understand. And that happens sometimes. People come to therapy. I tell this all the time to my trainees who run up against the Maos of the world and they're just pulling their hair out. And I say, just a reminder, people come to therapy because they have problems. Remember that? This is the problem. People don't come to therapy so that you can just sit back and not work hard and and everything goes fine. People come to therapy because they have problems. And when you run into the problem and you're frustrated, realize this is what you're there to do. A plumber doesn't go to a house, there's a leak, and the plumber walks in the house and finds the leak and goes, oh my God, there's a leak, and runs out of the house. No. Therapists address problems, very frustrating problems that aren't being fixed in the outside world and need a technician to really sit down, maybe for years, and work on that problem. So I have to remind myself of that sometimes, to be like, okay, this is frustrating, but this is why I'm here.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Amy, I turn the car around. I take different routes. We go and don't go. I swap the thing out. I change my clothes. The thing that you're describing, you get. The thing that you can't get, which is unachievable, is you can't get it 100% of the time.
So he's going to that place where I think their pattern is she will usually, I think, not try this because she doesn't think it's going to go well, but in therapy she's giving it a shot of just voicing her frustration with him. She tells him, I don't want a summary. Essentially, I don't want a lecture, this arrogant, narcissistic lecture, very common for this kind of relational injury. And then, he's being sarcastic. He's like, yes, whatever, essentially. And then she is discouraged and frustrated, and he senses that, and he's worried about that because he doesn't want to lose her. And then he goes to lecturing, which he is wrong-headedly hoping that his lecture will change her mind, which, of course, maybe it does kind of sometimes, but I don't think it's going to work in this instance. Let's see what the therapist does.
Wait, well, I don't mean like an actual dentist. I mean, there's a less challenging relationship out there that you don't have to fight so hard. Like the dude's always turning around and eating chocolate cake with cinnamon. I don't know what he is.
Interesting. So now he's going to a place of that place earlier, that little baby step towards growing up and differentiated. He's thinking, I think, she could be with someone better than me. There are better people. There are nicer people than me. But then he phrases it in this way of making fun of that guy. So, but I think, a big part of being an effective therapist is noticing when there is progress, even though it might not look like progress. I don't know, but when I hear that, I hear progress, even though it's still discounting to her. But we understand we can't expect someone to heal 10 years of therapy worth in one session. It takes a long time. So we all understand that we want him to be over here, but what are the iterative steps toward that place? And noticing that progression is important.
But it's not a problem, right?
So that goes back to my point of like, what's left?
I'm not understanding what the therapist is doing. I mean, is the therapist just assessing? Does the therapist not know what to do? Does the therapist think this is a helpful conversation? I mean, maybe that's what the therapist is thinking is, well, they're talking about it, they're working it out, Annie's expressing her frustration. But honestly, I would try to do something. I would try to intervene, and I would really go for Mao. Annie's fine. Annie is saying, look, I get frustrated with him sometimes. Everyone gets frustrated with their spouse sometimes. There's nothing odd about Annie's complaint. And it also seems quite credible given the way that we've seen Mao present himself in terms of his rigidity and discounting of her. So I don't, in terms of what's being presented, there's not a lot that Annie needs to do differently, but we got to go after Mao. We've got to create some different pattern, and often what I will do with the Maos of the world is I want them to be over here, but they're not going to go over there overnight. And in the beginning, I usually just try to create a question mark, and oftentimes I'll just phrase it that way of, okay, right now, Mao, it sounds like you have an idea about what's going on with Annie. You've made up your mind that she is overreacting or something like that. What if you just stepped into a place of a question mark, a place where you don't know, is she overreacting? Maybe she is, maybe she's not. What's it like to sit in that space for a little bit? So that's that transitional space into maturity and differentiation and care and compassion and empathy. To the therapist's credit, they don't show the full session, so maybe the therapist did all sorts of active things with the client. I would suspect that she is, because I think session to session we are seeing a progression with the clients, and Mao included. So I want to give credit to the therapist for that. And honestly, I want to commend the therapist for even doing the show. I don't think I would have done this show if they would have asked me. I'm sure they never would have, but if they had, I don't know if I would have, because it's such a vulnerable place to be. You don't know how people are going to act as clients. You don't know. All therapists have some insecurities or some large insecurities, and to be exposed like that to the entire world is pretty scary. So I commend her for doing that, and I think overall she's doing a really great job. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.